Well, Minister, this motion, this Labour motion, offered the first opportunity in the 34th Dáil to address and debate the question of housing. Our Labour motion set out a constructive and ambitious set of proposals, a pathway to reform housing policy, to ensure that government could provide a resolution to what is undoubtedly the biggest challenge facing you in government, the biggest challenge facing all of us, and indeed the biggest civil rights issue of this generation. We set out a credible pathway. We heard 7 first-time Labour TDs speaking with energy, with passion, with ideas about how the housing emergency can be tackled, how we can ramp up supply of homes. Contrast the energy, the ambition, the constructive proposals from the Labour benches with the tumbleweed that was blowing across the government benches for the 2 hours of this debate. We didn't even have the courtesy of one senior minister, let alone the no-show housing minister, James Brown, who didn't show. All we heard from was 2 junior ministers reading bland, pre-prepared scripts, devoid of ambition, devoid of urgency, utterly dismissive of the seriousness of the housing emergency. And Taoiseach, you're now in the chamber and you've spoken about the need to address the housing emergency. I think you recognise this, but that recognition is not evident in the response that your government gave us today to this housing motion. The first motion on housing before this Dáil should have been an opportunity for government to set out your stall, to set out the evidence-based policies that you propose to introduce to deliver for the communities that we all represent. Instead, what we've heard from government and from you, Taoiseach, over recent days has been a series of back-of-the-envelope Bertie-era, back-to-the-future proposals. Apparently, you're now thinking about abolishing or scrapping or reversing the rent pressure zones. You're talking, and I know you've rowed back a little on that, and that's welcome. But you've left renters across the country in a state of uncertainty, in great distress. We're all hearing from them. I heard from one constituent just this morning about this. Renters paying €2,500 per month on average for rents in Dublin, left in uncertainty because you've now floated this idea of doing away with rent pressure zones and no indication as to what they might be replaced with for renters who desperately need protection and security. And the other big idea you floated, Taoiseach, is tax breaks for developers. Yet, as my colleague Jed Nash has just pointed out, we have really no evidence that they would assist in delivering greater supply. And indeed, the evidence is to the contrary. If we look at the SRI's paper on tax breaks and construction, which simply, as the SRI said, transfer state money to developers without any discernible or significant increase in the supply of homes. The reality, Taoiseach, is your government's housing policy has failed, and that failure has been particularly evident in the appalling mismatch between the figures you promised and your ministers and the senior ministers in the last government promised that would be delivered in housing last year. 40,000 homes, time and again. The outgoing Taoiseach and Taoiseach and the Minister for Housing promised 40,000 homes. Latest figures suggest the actual completion figures for last year were under 30,000, below your own targets and 10,000 homes short of what you said would be built last year. And this really matters. It matters to the 15,000 people in homelessness. It matters to the 25-year-olds around the country. We heard from our Deputy Owen Kenny, who is one of those. In fact, he's 24. His generation, 70% of them are living in their childhood bedrooms, living on in their parents' homes. We all hear stories about 3 generations of families living in one house, 1, 2 or 3 bedroom house, crammed in, unable to move on, unable to move out because there is nowhere affordable to buy or rent across this country. There is nowhere affordable in a country where €2,500 is the average monthly rent in Dublin, where house prices are now averaging €600,000 in Dublin. And Taoiseach, you are offering us nothing in the government's counter-motion today, nothing in your programme for government, and certainly nothing in the bland speeches delivered by junior ministers today to indicate that you will have any change in housing policy. What are we in Labour offering? We're offering you a credible pathway for change, a state-led approach to intervention in the market. Of course we believe, in the private sector delivery too. In fact, if you read our manifesto, you'd see that we propose half of houses to be built each year would be private delivery. And we want to see a combined and diversified mode of delivery across different modes, through AHBs, through the private sector, but crucially also through a land development agency that must be transformed to deliver at greater capacity on state-owned land and indeed on private land, that must be transformed to deliver the social and affordable homes that are needed. Your party previously, Taoiseach, your party previously in the 60s instituted a national building agency that did deliver homes at scale. We can do this again, but unfortunately your government lacks the ambition and lacks the urgency to tackle this housing emergency.
Thank you, Deputy.